So this morning we're talking about expanding forever. Ernest Holmes tells us that our spiritual identity is forever expanding. Joel Goldsmith tells us that consciousness is unfolding. Consciousness is unfolding. And we are part of that unfoldment. And since consciousness is unfolding forever, that part of consciousness known as us is unfolding forever. Forever. And this idea of forever and this idea of unfolding and all of these things, they are beyond the grasp of the intellect. So there are some things that the intellect can know, and there are some things that the intellect cannot know. And the razor's edge is that balance where the intellect can help us to become aware of the fact that there are things that it can't know. And it can guide us into the practices, into the teachings, into the desire to experience that which goes beyond the intellect's ability to work out through logic and through reason. So I'll just give you a quick example of that from physics, because physics, until you get to the quantum level, physics is something that we seem to understand. You know, you can weigh and you can measure and you can touch things and you can mix things together and you know, you can do experiments, you can see reactions. But if you look at the Big Bang Theory, not the TV show, but the theory, is that at some point, and I won't even say at some point in time because it was a timeless point, at some point, everything that was compressed tightly into a very, very, very tight mass. And then something happened. Something kicked the can, as the physicists would say. Something kicked the can. And all of the energy that was contained in this tiny, tiny space began to expand. That was a big bang. And the theory then is that out of that singularity, out of that moment, everything else came forth. Everything else came forth. It's not too unlike the biblical explanation, you know, there was nothing, and God said, let there be, and there was. You know, something kicked the can, something got things moving. But the universe is expanding. It's expanding forever. And I caught a headline or an article on the internet this week that caught my attention. And, you know, we got to understand that the people who write headlines to attract our attention, right? And the headline doesn't always make sense with what's in the story. But the headline was that the universe is weirdly expanding faster than it should be. And the operative word was weirdly, you know. Why is this weird, you know? So the drift of the article is that the scientists who are familiar with these things, and God knows they're a whole lot smarter than I am when it comes to math, I'll tell you that. But they've calculated how fast the universe should be expanding based on this theory. And they know that the entire universe is expanding at a certain rate by their predictions. But recent measurements from the newer technology, the Hubble telescope, different experiments that we can put in space, what they're finding is that it is expanding faster than their calculations had predicted. So the headline writer decided that was weird, you know, of course it got my attention, so I read it. But what makes it weird? What makes it weird? Other than that, it's not behaving the way that we expect it. And I think that's a key point. We have to keep that in mind as we go through life. If something is not as we expect it, we tend to label that. Well, that's weird, or that's strange, or that's odd. And people even do this with with religions. Religions they don't understand are cults. So that's just a cult. So we tend to dismiss something that we don't understand as being out of the ordinary. It's not the way it should be, you see. And I chuckle because that's the way it is. That's the way it is. Whether we expect it to be another way or not doesn't matter, because that's the way it is. Either the measurements are wrong or the theory is wrong. There's maybe a combination of both. It just means we don't know. We don't know. So we don't understand. We think we understand. We have theories. And that's a good place. We have to start somewhere and say, well, this is my theory. This is my worldview. This is the way that I look at life. But then as bits and pieces of evidence start to come into our field of awareness, and something tells us that our model must be incomplete, our worldview, the way that we expect things to be, is incomplete. We can't just label them as wrong or weird or different. We have to be willing to say, perhaps this is an opportunity to grow. Perhaps this is an opportunity to learn. Now, the first thing we have to understand is that everything is expanding. But what is it expanding into? There's a quote allegedly by Einstein, and I'm going to give you the substance of it. I'm not going to remember it exactly, but it was something about when you come to realize that the universe is energy expanding into nothing that is everything, the problem of wearing plaids and stripes together becomes minimal. So think about that. The energy is expanding. It becomes matter and it expands. See? But into what is it expanding? What is it expanding into? If this is the universe and the universe is expanding, what is beyond it? What is beyond the universe? What is it expanding into? See? Again, I chuckle when the headline writers say that, the scientists have been able to see back almost to the edge of the universe, almost to the edge of the universe. And what do they expect is going to be there when they get to the very edge of the universe? A big sign that says universe ends here, proceed with caution. What is it expanding into? And if we think the universe is everything, it can't be everything if it is expanding into something. And this, I think, is what Einstein is chuckling at. What is it expanding into? It is expanding into nothing, but that nothing is everything. See? And if you think about that, that makes no sense at all. It is kind of beyond the intellect's ability to understand. If you go back to the other end, if you go back to the singularity at the beginning, and I said that there was no time at the moment. There was no time, there was no space. And we might ask science, well, what was it like at that very moment? And what was it like at the very moment before? And what is it that kicked the can? And what is it that got the Big Bang going in the first place? And the answer is, we can't know. We do not have the ability to know what it was like at the moment of singularity or the moment before. And the reason is that everything that we know, everything as we know it today, did not exist. So there was no way to measure. We couldn't weigh. We couldn't. There was no time. And we come to realize that the intellect has now explained to us that there are places that the intellect and our way of understanding through the intellect can't take us. We can't go there. It doesn't work. It is beyond anything that we have ever known. So on the one hand, we can't understand the nothingness of everythingness, which is the singularity. What is that? And where was it? If there's no time and space, where was it? Was there something outside of it? Is it this little tiny dot in the center of nothing? We can't grasp that. It doesn't compute. And if we go the other direction and we say, expanding into nothing, but is everything. We can't comprehend that with the intellect either. So last week we talked about immortality and the eternal. Now there's a difference between eternal and eternity. Right? And eternity just simply means something that goes on forever. Forever and forever and forever. That's eternity. It's like the movie Groundhog Day, doing the same thing day after day after day after day after day. And if we think about that, that in itself is kind of a frightening idea to us. I mean, it sounds like it would get pretty boring after a while. And I think the science fiction writers who wrote the vampire stories, I think that's what they're trying to tell us, These vampires had achieved immortality in terms of doing the same thing day after day after day. But over time, their lives became without meaning. They became bored to the point where death was a relief for them. It put to end this misery of going on and on and on the same way, day after day after day. But that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about the eternal. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about immortal. We're not talking about boredom. We're not talking about monotony. We're not talking about the same thing day after day after day. We're talking about constantly expanding consciousness. Constantly expanding consciousness. Now I said the intellect is limited. The intellect is limited in its ability. And the intellect can even admit that it is limited in its ability. But yet there is something else that we call consciousness. So the intellect might be a little like a computer processor, kind of working out things according to certain rules, certain programming rules. But there's something else. There's something else that is aware of the output of that working, of that intellectual working. Scientists who study the field of consciousness talk about this as being our field of awareness, our field of awareness. One of them even goes so far as to say that we are not really aware of the processes by which thoughts come to us. We're just aware that they have arrived. Now we tend to say, well, I had a thought, but perhaps it would be more accurate to say, I just became aware of a thought. We say we're going to go think through something. We're going to go work that out, And we have an intention. We have an intention to have an answer to our problem, to find a solution. We have an intention. But then something out of sight. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. It's kind of like the man behind the curtains, Something goes on off camera, so to speak, So if you're watching a TV show and everybody looks over to the side and something is going on over there, you can't quite see it, but there's something going on off camera. Our consciousness is sometimes like that. Our consciousness is aware that there's something happening, but we are not intimately familiar with the details. And I think that's a good model. When I first started working on computers a long, long time ago, we had to know all the way down to the zeros and the ones. We had to be able to look at the binary code, the zeros and the ones, and we had to be able to break that down and understand what that meant to the central processing unit. We had to know, but we had to, over time you could look at lines of zeros and ones, and you could kind of like the end of the movie The Matrix. The guy is looking at this scene and people are walking down the street, and it just suddenly dissolves into zeros and ones running across a green phosphorus monitor. And he says after a while you get to know what the picture is. So we would do that. We had to do that. We had to know how to get in there and do that. But as computers advanced, it's no longer required that we know how to do it. We simply know what we give it, and we know what we get out of it, and if it's not right, we change something. That's all there is to it. It all takes place outside of our field of awareness. So what we have to come to consider then, as we consider these ideas of eternal is here and now. Eternal is without a sense of time. No past, no future. Just the isness, just the suchness, just the I amness. And if we consider that there is this thing called consciousness that exists before intellectual thought, or independently of intellectual thought, which becomes aware of the output of intellectual thought, then we must stop and ask ourselves, what am I? Right? Remember, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Who am I? Now, when we think of this idea of expanding forever, or immortality, or eternity, that can be frightening to the intellect. The intellect has no idea how it would function, how it would exist. How can it possibly exist without this body? What is it like to go on forever and ever and ever? But that is the intellect. That is the intellect that is struggling with that. And what we have to come to understand is that we are not the intellect. We are not our intellectual capability. We are not the sum total of logic and reason, whether it be good logic or bad logic, whether it be reasonable or unreasonable, whatever the outcome of our thought processes might be. We are not that. We are not that. We are the observer of that. In a similar fashion, if we consider the physical aspect of our lives, if we consider our bodies, we are not that. We are not that. A very simple proof of concept of that would be that the body that existed when you were a small child, go back as early as you can remember, whatever body you had at the time of that earliest memory, that body is gone. It is long gone. Every cell in that body, including the bones, every cell has been replaced. Right? Turned to dust. But yet you are. You continue to exist because you are not that body. You are the consciousness that observed that body. You are the consciousness that expressed through that body. So we start to come then and say, well, wait a second, if I'm not the body and I am not the intellect, then what am I? And I think that the intellect would have to point us to the answer that says that we are the consciousness that is aware of these things. We are the consciousness that observes these things. We are the consciousness that experienced these things. But we are not those things. We are not those things. So if that makes sense, if we go down that line, then we say, what is consciousness? Was consciousness ever born? Will consciousness ever die? Or is consciousness, to use Einstein's image, is consciousness ever expanding into the nothing, which is everything? So I think our spiritual growth, I think when we start to shift, as we grow, as we mature in our consciousness, there comes a point where we start to make this shift between thinking of ourselves as mortal, as human, as a physical body, and starting to identify with what we might call the soul or the spirit or the consciousness. And as we start to do that, we can recognize that consciousness never had a beginning and consciousness never has an ending. But it is always here, it is always now. It is always here, it is always now. Now, sometimes we allow ourselves to be distracted. We allow our consciousness to dwell on the past, usually in some type of regret. Oh, why did that happen to me? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? Or into the future. And a lot of times the projection into the future is a projection of worry, a projection of, well, what if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? What am I going to do? And, I mean, it's almost like we're hardwired to worry, but it's not true. We are not. But it's as if we were, because as soon as somebody says, well, we're going to go do this, right, the mind starts to go with anticipation of all of the problems that could be encountered along the way and what we're going to do to counteract each and every one of the problems, you know. So for example, somebody says, well, let's get in the car and drive down to Florida this weekend. They're going to have a space shot. I'm just making that up. I don't know if they are or not. We said, okay, well, we're gonna go get a car and we're gonna drive. Well, gee, I wonder if Interstate 95 still has all of those orange barrels lined up all the way through the state of Georgia, and I wonder if they've got detours, and I wonder if the traffic is going to come to a standstill. You know, last time we did that, we were stuck in a traffic jam for 2 or 3 hours. We never even found out what it was. It was this traffic was at a dead stop, and on and on. And what happens, you know, are we going to run out of gas while we're sitting there in the traffic jam? So the mind kind of wanders in time and goes into the future and tries to anticipate the future and figure out what we would do to resolve any problems that would arise. And it's good. I mean, planning kind of helps us when it's time to plan. But many times it's nothing more than worry, and it's completely unnecessary. So what we have to start to recognize as we grow, as we become more oriented towards our spiritual nature than our physical nature, is that what we truly are is this thing that we call consciousness. That's who and what we are. And we are not victims. We are not victims of that consciousness. That is the important thing for us to realize. We have choice. We have will. We have volition. We literally choose what we entertain in our field of awareness, you know. So you walk into the room, the TV sets on, it's playing, and there's a show on that you don't particularly like. What do? You turn off the TV, change the channel, or think about something else. Just bring your mind to something else. We have that ability. We have that ability. Now, many times we give away that power. We say, well, I had no choice but to do this. I had no choice but to do that. Somebody said this and I had no choice but to get upset by it. They came on the news with this story and I had no choice but to be upset by it. And there's always a choice. There's always a choice. Many years ago, I was watching a short video on a man who was selling motivational tapes, and he had this little sketch, this little like pen and ink drawing, and it had two of the guards that you see in London, beefeaters. They call them the beefeaters. Had two of the beefeaters standing guard over this, in front of this doorway, and this doorway was the entrance to your subconscious mind. And he was talking about how our beliefs will not let certain things in. But it was a good visual. It stayed with me all these years. I probably saw that 30 or 40 years ago. We have that choice. We have that choice to instruct those guards what to let in and what not to let in, because it is our consciousness. Now, the problem that we face is that we spend our entire lives growing up and learning about the external world, the world out there. We go to school and we have to learn the things that school children learn. We have to learn ostensibly. We're learning the skills that we need to get through life. You know, how to read, how to write, arithmetic, and all those kind of things. And everything that we're learning is about out there, and it is about the externals. And we learn how to weigh, and we learn how to measure, and we learn how to conduct scientific experiments. And we are looking out there at everything out there. And what we have to realize is that all of that is changing. All of that we are looking at is changing. All of that is disappearing. All of that is going away. Someday it will all be gone. But what will remain is consciousness, So what we want to do then is we want to start just taking that energy that we were using to look at the world out there, and we want to turn that energy around, and we want to come in and look at the world in here. So rather than worrying about what it is that we're weighing, what it is that we're measuring, what it is that we're touching, we want to start to wonder about what is it? What is it that is observing the weight? What is it that observing the measurement? What is it that feels the touch? What is that? And that is consciousness. That is consciousness. That is what we are. And this consciousness is constantly expanding. So we come to this other dichotomy then. We come to this other problem, which is, whose consciousness is this? Is this my consciousness? Is that your consciousness? And is your consciousness different than mine, separate from mine, apart from mine? Or are we two instances, two unique instances of consciousness expressing itself? So what is this thing called God, if not pure consciousness? Spirit, spirit is another term that the intellect can't understand. But we think of spirit as consciousness without a body. Consciousness without a body. That's what we tend to consider as spirit or spirits in our culture. The spirits come and visit at midnight and all these kind of things. But what we mean by that is a disembodied spirit. Consciousness that exists without a body. We would say that this is the divine. This is God. Pure consciousness. Pure consciousness. In our experience, this thing that we call our consciousness has to observe something. It observes an idea that appears in our field of awareness. It observes something that comes to us through the senses. Now, mind you, what we interpret, the way that something comes to us through the senses and we interpret it, is not the thing itself. It is just merely our perception of it. It is what we make of it. So the sensory input is processed. Excuse me. And 100 of us can look at the same thing and see 100 different things, experience 100 different things. So we are the consciousness, not the external. But pure consciousness can observe nothing other than itself. Pure consciousness aware of itself. The Buddhists call this the clear light consciousness. Sometimes the blue light consciousness, because it's like a pale blue light. But if we go back and ask ourselves, well, what is this thing that society calls God? And remember, God is just a word that is kind of a waypointer to, as Joseph Campbell tells us, the word God is a metaphor for that which transcends every limitation of human consciousness. I love that. Transcends every limitation of human consciousness. No beginning, no end. All-powerful, all-knowing, transcends every limitation of human consciousness. This is pure consciousness, pure awareness, pure I amness, pure isness. Always in the eternal moment, always here, always now. No regrets of the past, no worries of the future, just here, now, being, experiencing. Fenwick Holmes wrote a little book called Being and Becoming, and it kind of deals with this theological problem that we face, which is, if God already is everything, why did God create anything? Is God becoming more of God through its creation? And if so, then it was never all that there was. There was something missing. Yeah? One of these riddles that theologians deal with. And the way that he resolved it, the way that other theologians resolved that issue, is to say that God already is all that there is, and all that there was, and all that there ever will be. But it is constantly changing. It's constantly changing within the allness, within the totality of what it is. It is expressing that in different ways. Never more, never less, just different. Just change, just change. It is constantly changing. Again, I like to go back to the image that I hold in my mind of somehow the invisible energy taking on the form of matter. And that matter expanding, and that matter becoming stars and planets, galaxies, universes, and black holes. And then the matter goes back into the black hole, and it comes out recycled as pure energy again. Right? So within the allness that God is, within the totality that God is, it is constantly expressing itself in unique and different ways. And our consciousness, that which we call our consciousness, is God's consciousness expressing through us. Now, I'm not saying that we are God, but I am saying that all that we are is some part of God. But we can never know all that God is. We are constantly expanding into a greater experience, awareness through experience, not awareness through intellectual logic and reasoning, not awareness through studying, not awareness through listening to lectures, but through actual experience. Our consciousness is constantly expanding into a greater awareness of what God is. if we come back then to who am I and why am I here, I am an individualized expression of the allness in the process, in the continuous process, in the eternal process of experiencing more of God. What this means to us is that if we are ever to be comfortable with who and what we are, we must embrace change. We cannot fight, we cannot resist, we cannot deny change. We must become aware of the fact that this very change is the growth, if we direct it that way, if we choose to direct our consciousness in that way. The changes that we go through in life can be a greater expansion of consciousness. Now, when I was looking at change, when we were doing change management, I was looking at change, I came up with an interesting model that said that there's two ways that human beings react to change. One is as if it's a change that we want, and the other is if it is a change that was imposed upon us someplace else. So you've all had jobs, and the boss comes and says, starting tomorrow we're doing this, and it's something nobody wanted to do. Oh, why are we doing that? So the steps that we go through when the change is imposed upon us and it is not our idea are the stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross defined. Right? So the first thing is denial. No, they're not going to do that. That's crazy. It's never going to happen. And then we get angry. And then we start to bargain. And then we go through depression. And then finally we accept the change. And it doesn't have to be death. That's where Kubler-Ross defined it. But it is typically any change that is imposed upon us that we don't want. And that's a struggle. That can be a struggle, right? If it's our idea, we start with unbridled optimism. Oh my goodness, this is the greatest thing in the world. We're going to go do this, and this is going to be wonderful. We need to just rush out and jump in and do it. And then the next step is, I call it the oh crap, what did I get myself into stage of the project, where you think, wow, well, maybe I bit off more than I can chew here. Maybe everything isn't going to be as great as I thought it would be. We kind of start to doubt creeps in. But then what happens to us is, since we were enthusiastic to begin with, since it was our idea, then what starts to happen is we start to look for all the reasons why it would work. And we slowly build ourselves back up into what's called informed hope. Informed hope. We start to say, well, no, this can still work. This can still work out. We can still do this. There's a way. And we learn more, and we grow, and we expand, and then the last step is success. Success. Since we now understand that we are consciousness, and that as consciousness we are continuously expanding, we know that change is always occurring. Always. Change is always occurring, and we can choose to deny it, to get angry about it, to try to bargain it away, or we can be enthusiastic. We can have unbridled optimism that says, oh my goodness, this is wonderful. This is fantastic. My consciousness is growing. Now we have to understand then that everything is consciousness, and consciousness outpicturing. Right? Everything is consciousness. There's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, to our consciousness. And what we have to come to accept is that the future, in whatever it may be, is a result of the consciousness we had yesterday. The saying is, today is the tomorrow that I created yesterday. Today is the tomorrow that I created yesterday. So we have to begin, if we're not already doing it, we have to begin as spiritual beings to deliberately grow and expand. To deliberately grow and expand. Now what we tend to do is we tend to allow ourselves to get caught up in the externals and the ain't it awfuls and look at the terrible things that are going on in this world. You know, there was another shooting at a synagogue yesterday. There was, terrible things happening. And we look at that and say, that's terrible. What can I do about that? And what we can do about that is we can try to change consciousness right where we are, because that's the only thing we have to work with, is consciousness. We have to remember that all of these strange things that we see outpicturing out there in society today, they are the death throes of an old consciousness that is refusing to let go. Everything is changing around it. It refuses to let go, and it's putting up a fight. Denial, anger. Okay, we're seeing the anger come out now. We're seeing the anger come out because change is happening. Consciousness is moving forward. Consciousness is changing. People recognize that those sorts of things are not acceptable. And they are in the process of going away. Now we do whatever we can physically to help, to help people. But more importantly, we work in consciousness to recognize that that is not the truth. That is not the truth. That is not the way things are in the mind of God. And what we can do to help ourselves and what we can do to help all of humanity is to deliberately take some time to step out of that, chaos, to step out of that madness, and to start to experience the consciousness that we want to unfold. Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see in the world. If we wish to see peace in the world, then you and I have to take time to experience peace. If we wish to see more love in the world, then you and I must take time to experience love in consciousness. And let it flow through our behavior, let it flow through our actions, but it has to start within, in consciousness. In consciousness. So since we know that we are pure consciousness, since we know that what we truly are is not the body, it is not the intellect, it is not even the ego, because the ego is a creation of the intellect. What we are is the consciousness that observes that, and we can choose to direct that consciousness in whatever avenue we want it to go. And we know that we are going to be unfolding forever and ever and ever, then it makes sense for us to get comfortable with change and unfoldment and growth now, right now. Because now is the only moment that we have. We can't do it yesterday. Yesterday's gone. We can't do it tomorrow. Tomorrow's not here. We really only live in the now. In the now. In the now. Right here. Right now. So we must take our time. We must make it a priority in our lives. We must take our time to do something with and for our consciousness. Dr. Dennis Merritt Jones, when we were out at a Silmar one year, asked the audience how many people had a special room in the house that was dedicated to cleansing their body. And everybody raised their hand. Everybody has a bathtub or a shower. And he said, how many people have a special room in their house that is dedicated to cleansing their consciousness? And fewer hands went up. And his point was, which is more important? Which is more important? The body that we take a shower for today is turning to dust. The consciousness that we ignore today unfolds forever. So we must become comfortable with this fact of forever, of the eternal. And another thing that helps us to do that is to recognize that you're already doing it. You're already in the eternal, right here and right now. It is not something that's going to happen later. It is here. It is now. It always has been. You have been experiencing it in this lifetime, in this plane of existence, in many different bodies and in many different situations. in many different places, excuse me, in many different relationships. But the consistent thing is you, the observer, are the same. We have to become intimately familiar with that observer, because that is the essence of who and what we are. And then the observer can become at peace with the circumstances around, because the circumstances are changing, and they will continue to change because consciousness as a whole is changing. There's two aspects of this that we want to leave in closing. And for those of you who've been in class with me, it's the evaporation versus boiling concept of consciousness. And what tends to happen is we come to a realization that life is a matter of consciousness, that everything that we see unfolding around us is a matter of consciousness, that people, even people who are doing cruel things, are doing things because that is an outpicturing of their consciousness. And we immediately begin to look for the splinter in our brother's eye instead of the plank that's in our own, to put it in New Testament terminology. We begin to wonder, how can we change those people out there? In other words, we want human consciousness as a whole to come to a collective boil, so that we all leave the old materialistic consciousness behind and we evaporate into spirit together. But that's not the way it works. That's not the way it works. Okay? If you think of a puddle outside on a summer day, and you put a thermometer into that puddle of water, the puddle is never going to reach 212 degrees Fahrenheit. It just doesn't, you know. The air temperature outside might be 85 or 90. I don't know what the puddle is going to reach. Maybe the cement will get up to 100 degrees. I don't know. But my point is that that puddle never boils. It never boils. Yet it evaporates. The water disappears. The water goes into steam. Now, how did the water get from water to steam if the puddle didn't boil? And what happens is that inside that puddle, one molecule at a time, one molecule starts to absorb enough energy that it reaches what the scientists call the escape velocity. Think of the molecule bouncing around in there like a ping pong ball bouncing off the walls of a room, and it just bounces and bounces and bounces, and it turns to steam. Now all the rest of the molecules in the puddle, they're still water. But that one has reached escape velocity and has left. Our spiritual growth then needs to be a realization that each and every person is where they are at this time by right of consciousness. And if we try to go out and fix everybody else, we're ignoring the only thing that we can ever fix, which is ourselves. And of course we don't need fixing, we just need awareness. We just need commitment. We just need dedication. So I invite you to consider this week that what you truly are, what I truly am, is consciousness unfolding. We are consciousness expressing itself as and through these things that we call us. But this consciousness is continuously unfolding. It always has been. We don't remember a beginning. And it always will be. And even though the material world tells us that there's a birth and then a life and then a death, there is no such thing to consciousness. There is only change. And this change is going to be continuously unfolding. Human consciousness as a whole is slowly, slowly, slowly raising itself to the boiling point. But we're not going to wait for that. We're going to be that individual molecule that zings around, becomes excited with the truth, becomes excited with love, becomes excited with peace, and makes the change. And as we do that, you see, there is a benefit to all of humanity. There's a benefit to all of humankind. There's what Dr. Holmes calls the race consciousness, what Carl Jung called the collective consciousness. As you and I deliberately choose to recognize spirit and consciousness and growth, and to take the time to be in the peace and to be in the love, as we do that, we tend to excite the molecules around us. All of human consciousness starts to improve by virtue of our practice. Joel Goldsmith asked his students to spend 5 periods a day in meditation, and one of those periods with absolutely no purpose, no technique. You're not sitting and repeating the word love or anything like that. Just sit and be still and know. And to do that until they felt the presence. And if they didn't feel the presence, that was okay. To do it anyway. Just sit there and be still and know. And at the very end, what they were to say is, through this meditation, a greater experience of the Christ being the presence of God within humanity, a greater experience of the Christ has entered this world. I invite you this week, take your time to experience that presence. Take your time to understand the value of that presence, that it is not only preparing you for the perpetual change that you surely will experience, but it is helping the entire world to move out of materialism into the spiritual awareness. You are God's consciousness unfolding into a greater awareness of itself. Let the journey begin in earnest today. And so it is.